to start with, we wait for the voice. We thought we would start with a bit of priming and getting us into the conversation. So we'll move into breakouts in a moment, and we'll give you a little bit of a brief for that. But beyond that, we would love to share with you some of our key takeouts from working with Eduvos over the last couple of years. We've had quite an amazing experience, learned lots, and there's been quite a lot of grit along the way. So we're here to share some of that with Eduvos's permission. And then we're going to open up the conversation and weave in some leadership maturity and Enneagram sort of awareness, because especially for all of us, most of us are facilitators and coaches, and many of us lead culture change movements, culture change projects for our clients. And what are some of the things that we need to be aware of? And I think Nicola and I have learned quite a lot about that in this process of working with Eduvos. Where are we coming in with our leadership maturity, and where does that mean we might have some blind spots or we might be missing the system? And similarly with the Enneagram. So we'll also weave that in later on in the session. So hopefully it'll be interesting. We're also looking forward to hearing what your experiences are, because I'm sure many of you have had some interesting experiences around culture. The saying goes, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I fully subscribe to that, and that's certainly been our experience. So to kick us off for the breakouts, we'd love to invite you to think for a moment about a culture intervention that you might have been exposed to. And it can be, as small or as big as you have been exposed. It could even be, in an organization that you've worked in or one that you are working in as an external person. But just call to mind a culture intervention that you have been exposed to. And think for a moment about, if you think about that culture intervention, what worked in the culture intervention and what didn't work? Just as a way to bring us into the conversation and prime for this topic. And we're going to move into breakouts and just to reflect and share your thoughts with each other. Please obviously introduce yourselves as well if you don't know each other already, and have a discussion. So Sharice, if we can have about 15 minutes in breakouts, bringing to mind a culture intervention, culture meaning the way we do things, right? So it can be anything related to that, and what worked and what didn't work. Enjoy the conversation, and we look forward to seeing what comes back.
Thank you, Kate. I'm just making the breakout rooms, and I will open up the rooms now, and there will be 15 minutes on the clock.
Thank you. Oh,
just
well remembered, please.
I need to have another good afternoon, everybody. I have another meeting now coming up, so I will leave for 30 minutes and then I will join. Sharice, do you want me to check out completely or just no? I have to go. No, because I'm the host, so I have to go.
Okay.
We'll let you back in later, Pat.
Was a good exercise, by the way, Kate and Nicola. Thank you for that. I'll be back at 30.
Thanks, Pat. Okay, so let's hear any learnings, reflections, what worked and what didn't. I'm sure there are lots of learnings in the room. What came up in the conversations?
I'm happy to share.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Andy.
So I shared an experience of that we had myself and a co-facilitator had done earlier this year. And in fact, there wasn't a immediate discernible necessary benefit from the experience. And as I was relaying the story, what occurred to me is that our work is really to plant seeds. And sometimes those seeds land on fallow ground, and sometimes they land on fertile ground. And just because we don't see an immediate result from an intervention doesn't mean that there hasn't been one. And it might take time to unfold.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the key things we've learned, or I've learned with culture, is it's not like you can press a button and something happens, right? It can often take a lot of time, and it can often take quite different probes or levers to be pulled, or a seed planted, and then it is realized later. Culture is not it's not a linear process, which is what makes it so baffling at times and complex. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for kicking us off. What else?
Yeah, I wanted to go. We also discussed similar thing that in the room during the facilitation, it brings out a space for people to interact and to understand different perspective from different people. But again, it's not something that you can immediately see beyond the room. And it's habits that will require changing of habits, and that takes time.
Yeah. And when we think of habits, habits are hardwired.
Yeah.
So cultures can become hardwired. And culture exists whether we like it or not, right? Like this thing that one can't quite put your finger on. It exists whether we want it or not. But it's how to make it explicit and then unlearn some of the habits if there's a shift that's needed. And it ain't easy. Yeah, thank you. What else came up?
In our room, we spoke about, Patty's left now, spoke about a Big Bang start, which came from an experience that she had where there was two companies merging. And another thing was around the impact of leadership being very much role modeling and engaged and engaging, and present and bought in. And that also linked into culture within families. Sandra was talking about the matriarch figure, so the people who have influence, and how culture kind of flows from their position. And another interesting thing that Asanda brought in, which links into Kate, what you were saying now, is unintentional culture, like the difference between intentional culture shaping and unintentional shaping, and that it exists, whether we like it or not. And so we started talking about some of the things that have shaped culture, or sort of unintentionally, like fear during COVID, that we started talking about as the breakout rooms closed. Asanda, was there anything that I left out from the notes that you took? Cool.
Yes,
Yeah.
maybe the one thing was about like how Pat was saying that leadership shapes culture. So we're talking about orders, like if you're talking about systemic work, like orders. So the person, the eldest in the family, they have the power to shape the culture, or like leadership in organizations, and how they shape culture.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for weaving that in, Asanda. And I so agree with you. And I was just sharing when we were, when you were in your breakouts, we were in our breakout. When the leaders don't role model the culture that is wanted, it just doesn't go anywhere. I spent years working with a particular organization, and the leader wanted the culture change, but he wasn't prepared to change himself or model it. And he couldn't understand why his team wasn't changing. So everybody looks upwards to how it's being shaped. So the people at the top have the greatest power in terms of culture. Not to say that there can't be a groundswell from underneath, but people look upwards for culture. And so leaders really need to be aware of their power when it comes to setting the culture. And I was intrigued by that Big Bang start. So was Pat saying that was a good thing, that's a necessary thing, like with the culture intervention? Yeah, that it's something that works. Kim?
Yeah, it was in the context of two companies merging, and two companies with very different cultures. Asanda, you were taking notes. I don't know if what I missed.
Yeah, she told a story about like over a weekend how the new owners of the company just changed the branding of the bank over a weekend. Just they enforced like this major change of like this massive bank, but they did it very quickly because they were like, we need to change the culture of this, and yeah, and that was it. And then everybody else had to adjust.
Huh. It sounds like a very interesting approach, an approach that possibly like called on energy to get behind it. But yeah, maybe when Pat's back, we can hear the rest of the story, whether it actually worked in changing something. Yeah, sometimes often more than a big bang is needed. It really needs buy-in, people buying into the culture change that's needed. Fascinating. It sounds like really interesting conversations. So, Nicola, shall we segue from there into sharing some of what we've learned with Eduvos?
It's showing?
Not yet.
Oh no. Check again. No?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, so just we wanted just to share some of our process that we used, some of the things that we saw work, some of the things that maybe didn't work so well, and what we learned from that, and kind of pull out hopefully a couple of nuggets as starting points for some more conversation. So when we first met the system, they also were going through a merger, a rebrand, and new ownership. And one of the major, or two of the major complaints were we work too much in silos, and there's so much red tape we can't even change a toilet seat. And so these were two of the big complaints. Whereas at the moment they've shifted into a much more engaged, not perfect, still messy, but alive ecosystem as the sort of feel of their culture. So just some of the turnaround journey that they've had over the last 2 years. Their turnover grew by 40%.
Nicola, sorry to interrupt. I'm just wondering if people need some context on does everybody know Eduvos? Have you heard of Eduvos? No.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Okay, great. Thanks for stopping me. So Eduvos is a private tertiary institution. They've got 12 campuses across the country and 1 online campus. Their focus is on building capacity and the economy through education, and they have a real desire to democratize and decrease the expense of tertiary education. So it's kind of making it available. Yeah, so they've, from a culture perspective, they've got certain pockets that have been around since the 70s and other pockets that are brand new. And so there's a sort of a patchwork of culture that has now been formed underneath a single umbrella of the Eduvos culture. Yeah. I don't know if there's something else to say, Kate.
Just that they were Pearson Higher Institute of Education. If Pearson has been told, yeah.
She's not supposed to leave, she's supposed to.
With this thing. There we go.
Cool. So yeah, their earnings before earnings before interest and tax and depreciation and amortization over the last 3 years have increased by 270 million. So they were when they were bought, not in such a great space. Student numbers have more than doubled in 3 years. They had 45,000 new job applicants, and including from public universities, which hold greater prestige in South Africa than private institutions. They've had a headcount growth of 30%, and increased number of exceptionally high-performing employees. The staff satisfaction, we've just been involved in the staff culture survey. It's massively increased, and the student satisfaction scores have gone up. So again, not perfect, still messy, still bumping into things, but a very, very significant measurable improvement along a number of fronts, and particularly around the profitability. So just a very high level of the 4 phases that we've been through with them since May 2021. So initially just getting alignment around what is the culture needing to be, what does that look like, what does that sound like, and so getting some clarity, which was the align phase. Then starting to look at what does that mean. When Kate was talking, and Chidi, I think you were also talking about, these are the habits that are hardwired. How do we actually start to embody the new culture? This is the hard work, and how do leaders lead it and actually demonstrate it. Then as it started to get legs, how do we now start to build momentum? How does it continue to evolve? And the space where we are at the moment is what we're calling self-generate. So how does the system take ownership for the culture? How does the system start to learn how to generate? How does the system learn about how culture works and what doesn't work? So looking more deeply into the organization for leaders who can lead the culture, and starting to build into the habits an appetite for looking for culture and how to grow it. So this is a kind of self-generating. This is just a sense of timeline, nothing that you need to really take, except that it's not a one-off wonder. It's been an ongoing conversation and an ongoing building and tweaking and shifting and changing process. We definitely didn't have phase 4. We didn't even know if we were going to do phase 2. So it has been something that's been layered and has emerged at the end of the last phase. So that's been some of that. And then as we were reflecting on the last 3 years, there were 6 takeouts. And we'll dig into each of them, but just from a high level, some of these have already been named. But the first was that culture was made part of the strategy. These are takeouts around what actually has made this culture intervention unusually successful. The second has been that the ExCo owns and drives the culture change. The third is that the whole organization participates. The fourth is recognizing that the culture is complex, looking at how systems and culture need to support each other, and then investing seriously in leadership development. So, Kate, do you want to kick us off with?
Yes, culture's made part of the strategy. So when one looks at this image, and any sports team really, one acknowledges that when sports teams are practicing and when they're building muscle, they're really focusing on the how, right? They're focusing on how they play the game. When they focus on how they play the game, the score takes care of itself. And that's essentially what we're trying to land with this point, is that culture is about the how we do things. So if we spend time and invest time as people in organizations around, well, how are we doing this? Or in our families, or whichever context we're in, right? How do we want to behave with each other? How do we want to engage with each other? How do we want to play as a team? Whatever the question might be, but it's about the how. At Eduvos, when we were brought in 3 years ago, there were 2 new owners that had come into the business. Both were, one definitely post-conventional, if we reference the Aephoria leadership maturity, probably at strategizing. He hasn't actually been tested, but in terms of how we see him operate at strategizing, has been involved in a couple of business turnarounds and has seen how culture has enabled the business turnaround. So he came in very quickly, and one of the first things he did was he pulled the culture lever. He was like, we need to focus in on what is our culture, and what's the culture that's going to drive our success. And that started the process. When we got, once the culture was defined, we then moved on to strategy and vision. Interesting, right? So culture almost came first. And then when we got to working out the strategy, culture was made a pillar in the strategy. So the strategy was about scale, impact, and culture. Culture wasn't left as a soft, fluffy thing on the side. It was made core to the strategy. Now, we don't often see that in organizations. I think it's the first time I've seen it in an organization. And I suspect that a lot of that has to do with a leader who's more post-con and has had direct experience of culture driving strategy and being core to the strategy. And if we start looking at some of his experience, and if you start looking at some stats out there, like Gallup talks about, culture and investment in culture leads to things like higher engagement, right? If people are connected to the culture, they're more engaged. That means they're more productive. They're more agile in terms of how they respond to what's happening in the marketplace. They're more inspired. Competitive advantage translates into a different client experience. So culture becomes a competitive advantage. The way we do things translates directly into our client experience, right? We can attract and retain talent that fit with the culture. It aligns everyone and points them in the direction of where we're going. So just some threads there of how core culture, how potent it is when it's made part of the strategy and not just a soft, fluffy add-on.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Nicola?
Yeah, just, I mean, that from a very big picture was what's being driven from the top, but even as it was starting to become adopted deeper and deeper into the organization, that culture is linking with goals, even at a campus level, at a team level, is that this culture is not something that's separate from our goals that we have to do, that takes away from our core work. It's like, this is how we reach our goals, was very strongly messaged. Yeah, so I mean, it's a bit heavy on the Springboks, but I mean, can you really overplay the Springboks at the moment? But as Kate was mentioning, the owners and the exco, they are the owners of the culture as well. So they are the sponsors for the culture. We were brought in by the owners and deeply kind of supported by the CEO. So this wasn't something that sat in HR, and it wasn't something that sat in another department that was separate or underneath or competing with the bottom line. It was the enabler of the bottom line. And the more that was not just championed, but actually that the leaders were open to being challenged to live up to the culture in quite robust ways, the more believable it was, because there was quite a lot of cynicism in the system and quite a lot of trauma, actually. And yeah, well, let's just see if things actually do change. And more, there's a sense of, we're actually seeing the change lived by the leaders. And so that's been a hugely powerful driver of adoption.
And one of the first things that the new owners and exco picked up, they said, it feels like the culture here is sort of parent-child-like. So some of us will recognize that, right, in transactional analysis, parent-child. And they said, but we don't want that. To bring out the best in our people, we need an adult-to-adult culture. And that's the shift that we need to make to really realize our potential as an organization. And so from the get-go, they said the whole organization needs to participate. Not has to, it's voluntary, but everybody is invited to participate. And what that meant was that we started with a culture survey. So first an online engagement, and everybody was invited to complete that. We then took it into online culture sessions, engagement sessions, again, voluntary. People could sign up and come and check it out and make their contribution. And people were asked, well, what do you love? And what is it that makes us successful? And how do we do things around here that we love? And let's build our culture around that. From there, we got a whole lot of values themes. So values is always a core thing, a core ingredient of culture. So if you make culture explicit, values is a key part that needs to be defined alongside purpose. And so many people in the organization gave input into that process. And I think it was very new for a lot of them to be invited to even participate. But then what I also haven't seen before is we took all that feedback back to the exco and in fact, the senior leadership team, and they listened. And we built the values from the input that all their people had given. It wasn't like that was, oh yeah, we ran the process and we got that, but now let's actually build what we want. They really used what their people had given. And as a result, when we then played back the first draft, people who had contributed from, lowest stages in the organization said, oh, but there are my words. In the values, their phrases were coming through. And so they knew that they were being heard. So it was almost the process of involving everybody was almost the journey of the culture change, and was starting to shift the culture because people could see that they were being heard and listened to, and their inputs were being taken seriously. And then there was even a chance at that point for people to contribute to a further round and say, well, they did agree with this or not, and tweaks were made. So people felt heard again. And since then, I mean, that was 3 years ago. Since then, there's been an ongoing culture conversation that everybody is invited to. And people show up in full force, and it's creative and fun, and it's an evolving conversation and alive. And yeah, I think it's made a huge difference to actually shift the culture. So the process has been the thing to start shifting the culture. Yeah.
I mean, and linked to that, I think there was a sense of patience, that it's not about the speed of decision making, it's about the speed of adoption. And sometimes we have to slow down the decision making process to actually speed up the adoption process. And I mean, just as a side note, they also involved the whole organization in the name, the renaming, the rebranding, and the logo. And so there's been a real kind of bottom up approach that as Kate was saying, really embodies the sort of culture they're wanting to nurture. Yeah, so this is an ongoing conversation, and sometimes it lands and sometimes it doesn't land quite so well, but we keep working it. There's been a layer of leaders who have recently clicked that around complexity versus a complicated or simple system, and the need to see culture as an ever-evolving thing. You never get to the point where you can tick culture off the list. It's much more like a garden where we need to keep having an eye on what's working and what isn't, and what's sitting in the shade that should be in the sun, and where are the weeds that we're needing to pull up now. And so keeping the conversation alive, keeping it connected to what is this team going through now, what is this department going through now, what is this campus going through now, and how do we need to be tweaking the culture to make it work. It's so beautiful when these things land. You see the lights come on in a group, and then all of a sudden there's a kind of, okay, this is why this hasn't been working. This is what we're needing to shift here, because we were doing that thing from 2 years ago, and actually our circumstances have changed, and we're needing to change the culture in this part. Kate, I don't know if there's something else you wanted to comment on.
Yeah, and I think that it was around this point that I was intrigued by Pat's mention around a big bang. In my experience, it's not the big bangs that necessarily have the big impact, although maybe sometimes it does, but it's the little things, because culture sits in a complexity frame. So it's often little probes into the system, little experiments in the system. And when they work, then you amplify them, and they drive the culture in that direction. Little experiments like the new owners saying, well, let's invite everybody to participate. Survey. Okay, yes, there was take up with that. Okay, let's have some actual engagement sessions. Okay. So it nudges the system in the right direction. I think this is where the grit really lies, because yeah, it's often hard to see what's the experiment that needs to be run next, right? That's going to shift the culture in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, and that's been something where we've really learned. We tried certain things hoping for an outcome. We used culture ambassadors hoping for hoping to land this idea of complexity and nudging the system and responding. And it had limited impact. And so there's been a real kind of reflect on what's going on here that's not working. Why is this not having the impact we're wanting? And then realizing that we actually need more people, more like a guiding coalition, that with people of greater seniority involved in that process, or in parallel to that process. It wasn't amplifying to the degree we were hoping. So there's been something about us working with this constantly adapting methods, and then helping the leaders and the people inside the organization to keep doing that themselves as well, because obviously they're right close. Yeah.
So this one, systems and culture supporting each other. So it's almost this idea of they wash each other's hands, they reinforce each other. And for those of you who are familiar with integral theory, though you don't necessarily need to know that, but it's this idea that systems, as in structure, processes, more sort of concrete things, and this nebulous thing called culture, the way we do things, which is often less obvious, that those two things need to support and work together. They need to support each other. So if you've got a culture of wanting to be very human, but systems that are not supporting that, then you're not going to be able to drive that culture. And so at Eduvos, some of the systems really needed to be overhauled. Like IT systems were outdated. And one of the values we defined at Eduvos was entrepreneurial spirit. And with an outdated system, that was never going to encourage an innovation, like coming up with new ideas. They were also mostly running as a hierarchical structure in terms of management and what have you, and they evolved into a matrix structure. And it was the matrix structure that encouraged movement away from those silos to much more cross-pollination across groups. And again, tapping into that entrepreneurial spirit, relevance, more humanness, like many more stakeholder conversations. So systems and culture really need to work together. More recently, they are also now updating other systems like recruitment. Let's hire for our culture. Let's onboard according to our culture. Let's do our performance reviews using our culture. So the values are now built into the performance reviews, and it's not just about, are you hitting your sales target? It's how are you doing it? That is part of how you are reviewed. So really key that these two things work together. If they don't, very hard to make a culture shift happen.
Yeah. I mean, and another element of that is that the culture is part of the KPAs or KPIs. It's been included as what people will be measured against towards the end of their cycle. And just also seeing that while the systems have been supportive of, or need to be supportive of, the desired culture, there was a realization that if we're wanting to be innovative, we can have all the systems in the world, but if we don't have a space where people can think and feel psychological safety to think, the systems are just not going to be used to their optimum. So it's been a very intentional thing of what are the systems we're needing, what is the culture we're needing to make those work, and vice versa. And then the sixth thing that we've identified in this particular organization is they have invested seriously in leadership development. This has not been lip service. They've invested lots of budget, lots of time, and inside an organization that's about 1,000 people, 200, am I right, Kate? 200 or so of the leaders have been through intensive year-long processes. And so there's a kind of real embodying, and a lot of the leadership development has been very experiential, not theoretical. They've done things like equine, worked with the Enneagram. We've worked with them with maturity as part of that process. And so there's been a real practical and embodied development of their leadership capacity, and it's paying dividends now. Yeah. Anything I'm missing there, Kate?
Yeah, I think, you know, when one brings in the maturity lens, so education institutions often come in with a center of gravity at specializing, which is appropriate, right? For an education institute, you want people to know what they're doing. They technically need to be really competent. And so there are a lot of people in the system with many degrees, PhDs, you name it. But if we are all at specializing, we're not necessarily going to get culture, because specializing is more about the what and what we know, not how we do it. So the leadership development has kicked in a process of maturing to the next stage. And there's, amongst leadership, there's probably more of a stage shift now to performing, where people can really recognize the culture and how we're doing things, how important that is. So I think leadership development has been an absolute game changer for this organization. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a lot of talking from us.
Yes.
Let's
Thank
stop
you.
sharing, huh? So we'd love to put you back into groups, but before we do that, just a bit of reflection. So if you've got a pen and piece of paper handy,
Nicola, why don't we pause for a little bit of a Q&A in case there are questions?
okay, sure.
Yeah. Any, thoughts, comments, add-ons? Pat, I'm sorry, I know you missed the slides, but
I will listen. Thank you.
yes. Yeah.
I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll just click back to the one that's got the 6 points, and then Pat, at least you can kind of get the
gist.
overview.
Yeah, any thoughts, surprises?
If I may,
Yes.
I'm wondering on particularly focusing on, you say you started working on moving the organization from specializing to performing. So I'm wondering what kind of interventions were you able to put in place that worked?
Yeah, interesting conversation. So we were not the ones responsible for the full leadership development program. We were involved in parts of it, and part of that was Enneagram assessments and debriefs, both individually and as a group, and leadership maturity. So people became very aware of those things, but the leadership development program then took it much further, and some of the immersions that happened, equine, so working with horses, where horses basically mirror, like what they pick up what's going on inside a leader, and the leader will, I don't know how to explain that. Maybe you can explain that better, Nicola, but I'm sure some of you have been exposed to equine. What other immersions? They had a series of immersions, something called the Titanic. These are immersions driven by an organization called Stellenbosch Business Institute, and they were responsible for the overarching leadership development program. We did a cooking experience with the top leadership across the matrix, where they had to create things out of nothing in little pods with, heat experiences being lobbed in on top, and some of the ingredients being taken away, and under time pressure, and that was a mini heat experience where they also took lots of learnings. But I think as many of us know, with moving a group up a stage or to a later stage, involves 3 things: heat experiences, colliding perspectives, and elevated sense making, if I can quote Nick Petrie, who's articulates that so well. And a year-long experience with lots of learning and support in between. Yeah. Does that answer it enough? Yeah. Andy. And then, oh, no, I think Laura was first. Sorry, Laura was first, and then you, Andy.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to go back to the second point that you raised about EXCO owning and driving the culture change. And I'm wondering if you were involved in priming EXCO to do that, or whether that was something that EXCO took upon itself without any priming from you guys. Because it's hard to, I mean, the biggest challenge in I find in kind of changing or driving culture is getting the top to really buy in to the whole, you know, the whole change.
Nicola?
So, yeah, I mean, so initially, I mean, in the layers, the owners, there was the spontaneity. So it was clear and obvious for the owners, and the CEO quickly got it, and continues to develop her understanding of what this actually means. The senior leadership team took a little while to land what it actually means to lead culture. But as they have gone through the leadership development, that has become very internalized. But so maybe there's been a level of priming at the kind of top team, but from the very, very top, it's been owned and driven and initiated, which gives such huge permission for this being a relevant and important conversation.
Yeah, very hard, Laura. I mean, you know, very hard to get anything going if you don't get that top buy-in.
Yeah. And if the top buy-in is so diffuse in the way they work, and then you're sort of just under there trying to, and you've been mandated with this idea, it's like a bit mind-boggling to me how you get everyone on board when there's such varied levels of buy-in, and in some case really a lack of insight that anything really needs to change, although the company itself is crying out that it needs to.
I think I would double click on that and really emphasize, if you want to change anything, the buy-in at the top has to be there, and often the only way to get it is through one-on-ones and like drilling into like, what is the business case for it, and what am I going to get out of it? What's the me going to get? What's the we going to get? And what's the business going to get? And if somebody, if one of those leaders is that specializing, it's not always that easy to see the we and us, right? There's more of a focus on the me, but yeah, absolutely critical. I'm not sure I would touch another. I've had difficult culture change processes where I didn't get the full, I got the buy-in of the top person, but then not the rest of the team. And it's very hard. Not sure I would put all the effort in again for that.
I wanted to add to that, Kate, definitely. I was just putting something in chat, but I was too quick.
Yeah.
I would definitely not touch any culture intervention if the full top is not on board.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Pat.
It doesn't work. I've done it, by the way, so I learned the hard way.
Yeah. And I mean, I know facilitators who literally do that. They even if the job looks fantastic and the money is there and it's being signed off, they say, no, we want to meet all the senior team first, one-on-ones, and we want to check for buy-in before we go ahead. And they walk away from many things. Yeah.
But what if the leadership, the top management, they speak the language, but they're not walking the talk and getting into that? Because that also happens where it's things needs to change, but they need to change, not us.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point. And I think our experience is it's not binary. But yeah, sometimes somebody can speak the language, not walk the walk fully, just a bit. And so in that case, it's a little bit of shifting the dial and dialing up where the leader is actually embodying the culture and where the gaps are. Sometimes the balance of things is just so far to it just being lip service. Yeah, I don't know. Also been burnt in that space.
I just saw your slide, and that's why leadership development parallel to culture shift is such an important parallel track. So if you do culture change, it's not only, and it's what you say, CD, they don't know what they don't know yet. So there needs to be a leadership development part as well. And I saw that on your slide, and I agree with that.
And even if it's not a full leadership development program, I've also had experience where, you know, we start the culture change process, and then as long as the senior team are having some one-on-one coaching sessions that start bringing them along the journey, that, you know, that brings them into the process much more. Yeah. Andy, we didn't.
Thanks, Kate. I was curious about when you noticed a shift in the rest of the system. So you said that the leader of the organization at a strategizing level was immediately on board. When and like how long did it take, and was there a particular intervention or something that happened in the system that shifted the rest of it?
I think it's, yeah, I mean, it's hard to pull out like specific things, but just the running the process in the way that it was run, right, around involving everybody and building the new culture, coming up with the values, that definitely started a shift. So we started seeing in the engagement survey, there was a fair response rate, but then in the engagement sessions, people were more engaged, and so it rolled. But it's with complexity, which culture is, it's little steps, and knowing which levers to pull. I mean, I also think the owner at Strategizing, he pulled some levers along the way, one of which was he paid a bonus to everybody. If I'm remembering correctly, Nick, this was about 2 years ago. He paid a bonus before people had actually reached the targets, because he said he knew that they were going to reach it. And so he promised that, and that was like a real like fuel to the system of, okay, we can do this, like we're being believed in, we're gonna go for it. So there were things like that, as well as the systems upgrade, I think was a big lever. Initially tough for the system, you know, a lot of change was happening, but has really opened up so much for the way people are operating in the system. So there, I guess there's some specific things that one can point to, but culture is it just evolves over time, right? It made little shifts. It's like us as human beings, like if whoever we're coaching, we don't see an overnight change. It's small incremental steps. And then people look back over 6 months and they go, oh yeah, okay, look at the change. So culture's like that.
Yeah, I was thinking about exactly that. There are two kind of step changes, I think, inside the incremental. And the one was a recognition of the system of itself between the intake quarter, which is their most manic time, last year to this year, and just reflecting on who they were as an organization changed their identity. It changed their sense of who they are, how they operate, how when they operate like this, they actually end up with better results. And so there was a kind of a tectonic shift in, I read it like that. And the other thing that I think really has tipped another sort of step change has been a critical mass of leaders who have been invested in now. So initially just the little top tier, then the top 100 people, then the top 100 people again for a second year, and then the next 100 people. And now there's a critical mass in what we're talking about around leadership and culture, that it might go back a little as systems do, but it's never gonna, it's not gonna go back to where it was. It's much too embedded.
Mm. Mm.
Thank you.
So should we do some reflection on
Yeah.
us and our role, whatever role it is that we play inside system change around culture? And just a couple of questions to consider on your own before you get back into the groups. And the first one is, how might leaders and or systems at different stages of maturity approach culture change? So how might leaders and or systems at different stages of maturity approach the project of culture change? Second question is, how do we connect meaningfully with people at different stages of maturity around this topic of culture? How do we connect or engage meaningfully with people at different stages of maturity around culture? And then thirdly, as a facilitator of culture change, and whatever your context is, given your Enneagram style and your center of gravity around maturity, what do you bring? What are the strengths that you can bring to a culture change process? And what do you need to watch out for around blind spots? So, yeah, Kate's just pop those into the chat so that you've got access to them. Really encourage conversation that builds on what you're hearing. I think it'll be 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if you're not familiar with the maturity stages or Enneagram styles, I hope somebody in your group will just bring you along a little bit. But I think most of you are familiar. Yeah.
Great. Awesome, Charisse, you can do your magic.
Fantastic. I'm opening the rooms and 20 minutes on the clock.
We thought we'd given you way too much time, and you're all still here. So good conversations. Yeah. Okay, let's hear. What did you discover? Maybe let's start with question one. How do leaders and systems at different stages approach culture change? What did you discover? Yeah, Miriam.
I would say that I used to do a lot of culture change as a consultant, working more from the numbers and a whole other world, not the coaching world, although we pretended we were coaching people those days. But now I'm very, very careful, and I want to work with the person, the leader of the organization. If I can assess that the leader isn't specializing, I wouldn't touch it. And the more work I do on the Enneagram, the more I understand, or the better I get some things about that. And unless they're at a more advanced stage, I don't bother. I wouldn't offer it. It's too much. It doesn't work. I feel that there is this
yes, I really want to have this done, these changes made, but I know how to do it. And this is how we do that. And it would be dangerous territory for me to work with someone in a particular stage and like specializing or conforming. I had a person that ran a group that was conforming and was very successful. But the moment they stepped out of a zone, it was horrible because it was the culture of everybody doing exactly what they were supposed to do, like soldiers. And until that person, the leader, sees the impact of all their things, the change would be how they want it to be. Because they would find reasons why even a culture survey would be wrong. So there's got to be a certain level of maturity to the person. Maybe someone else could do that, but I don't know how, and I'm not going to kill myself.
Thanks, Miriam. Anybody got a different view or wants to build onto that idea? It's such an interesting idea, right? Because if we think about maturity, most of our clients probably would sit at specializing. That would be the center of gravity, and maybe some at performing. But yeah, if our leaders are sitting at specializing and nobody wants to do culture interventions with them because they know, I wonder, yeah, how that would be. Anybody got a different view or and want to add something on there?
This is a thought rather than an experience, but with the specializing leader would be to do that stage 6, invest seriously in leadership development ahead of culture. If you can try and elevate their or expand their identity, or get them to stretch into performing.
But and often at specializing, like there's this word culture that's bandied around, but there's not a full understanding or connection to what culture means. Mostly that kicks in at performing, right? This notion of purpose and values that we can really get behind, and inspiring people to get behind those things.
Or perhaps that one of the early slides you used that had all the benefits of it, increased revenue, staff retention, all of these kind of things to get into.
Absolutely, the business case. And that's what we had an experience with a client where the head of HR was probably, we don't know, but was probably at specializing. It was more around metrics and tactics and reports and like tangible, concrete things. And yeah, so, but you're right. So if one can bring more of a business case and a toolkit and more of the science, that's the way in. But it's not necessarily an easy way in for culture change to happen, is my experience. Yeah. Any other thoughts around this particular question? Shall we move on to the next one? So I guess we've sort of started answering that already. How do we connect meaningfully with people at different stages around culture? Right, it's specializing more facts and science and business case toolkits, formulas, recipes, anything else for specializing that hasn't been mentioned. Anything else we had, Nicola? It's more about the me often specializing. And a mapping, or like a roadmap, that's often what's needed. Very practical, more content focused rather than process focused. Yeah. What about performing? Like, how do we connect meaningfully with people at performing? Any inputs there? We're all having such interesting conversations. Now everybody's quiet. Anything else?
Maybe because we dealt with more specializing cases than with performing.
Ah, okay. Okay. Has anybody had an experience of working? I mean, Miriam, you must have had an experience working with performing. If specializing is not where you like to play, how do we connect meaningfully with people at performing?
Well, the experience of my thinking is when someone's at performing, they're looking at the more of how the others are doing and starts to really look at how they can support. So it's always with the eye of how do we deliver better results, right? Results. But they're also willing to, increase their perspective a little bit. And so even if you do a survey, they would be willing to listen more and pay attention to that survey. And if a leader can pay attention to that survey, then they can create new possibilities and then listen to the others. So, and it makes a huge difference because it's about their listening. And it's not always about, I'm much smarter than you. I always tell my clients, you're the orchestra conductor and you understand the parts, but you're not playing those parts. So how do you understand those parts better? And how can people work with you teaching you that? So it would be easier to create change and not force it. Because the idea of the leader is to pull up their staff. And it's so interesting. It has a lot to do with their personality types also, right? With their topology. And where, so if someone is performing in an Enneagram 2 or an Enneagram 3 or whatever it is, they look through different filters. And as their coach, you can help them through those filters, how it would work. So that would be, and working with someone at that level or even somewhat a leading edge into post-conventional would make life easier, but not everybody is there and culture is desperately needed. So I call culture the operating system of an organization that we can't see, but we can feel. And all the other parts of the organizations are like the apps on it. So if the operating system is old or needs to be fixed, the apps don't run well on it. And people listen to that and they laugh, but they get it.
Thanks, Miriam, for sharing your wisdom, and what a beautiful way to articulate culture and to make it practical for a system. Thanks for giving us a window into performing and how it is to meet meaningfully at performing. And I'm aware, Audrey, I see your note. I'm aware some people aren't so familiar with the level 2 maturity stages. So we'll just do a light touch here. But Andy, let's come to you.
Thanks. Yeah, just on the connecting with performing, I think it's important to allow the person to drive, so that the coach or the facilitator's role is very much in a supporting role, not to come in and sort of dominate the space with, we know exactly what to do and how to fix it, and this is how it needs to be done. It's rather ready to be receptive and listen and really act as a foil or a guide to their ideas and what they see.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. Our experience at performing is a lot of what you've all been saying. So very consultative, listens, but also wants a bit of a roadmap and wants a big bang often. Pat, that big bang that you talked about, people at performing often want that. It's like, let's have a big launch and it's more sort of programmed. Yeah, but a longer time frame, looking at some of the notes we made. Shall we, I'm sort of watching the time. Shall we come to the last question, which was really about like what we need to keep an eye on as facilitators, given what we know about ourselves, maturity or Enneagram style. Anybody, did any new insights pop up for anybody? Yeah, because it's a really interesting thing to think about. How are we coaching, approaching a culture intervention? Anybody want to share what it means you bring or need to watch out for as an individual? Yeah. Karen.
So I recently did a Teams coaching at an old age home. My case study was an old age home with a team of social workers and occupational therapists. And there was a person that like organizes all the events. And they were, my Enneagram is a 7, and performing stage 7. That's my maturity. And so I'm very aware that as a 7, I get over enthusiastic. I'm very energetic. And my personality mix, I only did the Enneagram with them, not adult maturity, but it was the opposite of what they were as a team. You can imagine what the personality is of an old age home. It was very much, you know, like 2-9-ish, you know, as a mix. I was very aware that I need to be very careful not to impose be too energetic, but also that was the energy that they were missing. You know, so it's a fine balance between what they're missing and one's got to bring it in a delicate way. So not to be overpowering as a 7.
Well said. Thanks, Karen, for sharing that. So I lead from Enneagram 4, and I'm often the only 4 in the room because we don't see many Enneagram 4s in systems or in organizations. And I completely resonate with what you're saying. We've got to know that we're bringing something different, but also be quite aware of what we're bringing and that it doesn't tip the system into something else and that it's too much. Yeah, so I'm very conscious of that. Nicola, let's bring you in because I think it's time to also start wrapping.
Yeah. So our final question is what practical thing, what insight is emerging for you from this conversation that you can take forward practically, that you can use in whatever work you are doing? And maybe that can be our closeout. So if you want to pop it in the chat, then do that, but it would be great to hear some voices as well. What are you taking from today that you can use?
I'm happy.
Okay, let's go, Kate and then Andy.
Kate.
Well, I thought Nsiki looked off mute, so I was going to invite your voice in, Nsiki. Can we?
You want me to talk or someone was talking?
No, we're inviting you to talk because you were off mute.
I don't know how I became off mute, but I welcome the invitation. Thank you, Katie. So for me, I was still trying to consolidate what I'm taking away. I think first and foremost, thanks to you and Nicola for an amazing session. I love the questions. They really helped me to think quite deeply around culture change and the role of leadership. So for me, what I'm taking away is and I think it came quite strongly in the previous conversation. I can't remember now, the person was saying that she can't work with the people that are in the specializing area. And what I was thinking is the balance between working with individuals, but in a group context, isn't it? And how other members of the system can also impact and shift the other people. So it's not, so that's what I'm thinking, in that, you know, that not seeing only people in isolation, but also see people within a systemic environment, that that they can learn from others, and they can be influenced by other people in their teams and also in the organizations. But the patience, I'm in 8, so it really was something that I was reminded again, that to be able to be patient and not to overwhelm. It's something that I need to continuously work on. It's very hard, but it's something that I need to continuously work on. Yeah, so those are I know my what I'm saying is all over the place, because I was still kind of consolidating it in my head.
That's great. Thanks, Nsiki. Kate, and then Andy.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. So it's been a really fascinating workshop. So thank you both very much. It's just brought a whole lot of ideas for me to even to take into have discussions with my clients around. So I love the just things that stood out for me today around culture needing to be a pillar of the strategy. And just that, I think that's such a valuable discussion point that I can even go and have with my clients, and really try and bring that home more. Just because where I am seeing a culture trying to be created within an organization, sometimes being part of it, sometimes not, but just kind of maybe bringing that side of it, or emphasizing the importance of that. And that because my experience has also been, and it was mentioned earlier today, around unless leadership really buy into any of these interventions, it's complete waste of time. So yeah, so I think that is just such a wonderful way of wording the importance of culture. And yeah, you've just given, it's just been fantastic, to lots of food for thought and amazing conversations. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And final voice, Andy.
Thank you. Yeah, just really to echo a lot of what Kate said, is that it's an incredible case study to sort of see it, how it unfolded across those years that you rolled it out, and suddenly there's a lot to take away from here, and really appreciated seeing, not that it's complete in terms of its intervention yet, but to see how it's developed and how it's rolled out and what's come out of it. And then some of the high level stuff around focus on the how, and the score takes care of itself. I really thought that was useful. And then how you can build culture into strategy, and those things having scale, impact, and culture as those kind of objectives for the vision were really good to hear. So yeah, it was very encouraging. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for your contributions and attention, and yeah, hopefully it's something that will continue to stimulate conversation around culture. So thank you from me, Kate.
And from me, and we need adult cultures. We need great cultures, right? It's what will change the world. So go forth and try it out. Yeah, so thanks so much, everybody, for bringing in all your learnings and experience too. And over to you, Cherise.
Thank you so much, Kate, Nicola. Wow, we've reached our closing time. What an engaging session. Well done, and thank you for your time, and thank you for everybody's shares. It's been really awesome, lots of golden nuggets coming out of this, and thank you to the client for also allowing us to have a look inside.